This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice. Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. My guest today is Tilden Moschetti, and we are talking about syndications. Tilden, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gabe. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to our chat.
Tilden, you have been a real estate attorney for about 2 decades now, and a while ago you transitioned into being a syndication attorney full-time. In a nutshell, what does a syndication attorney do?
Basically, I help real estate developers, people who want to start real estate professionals, really anybody who's looking to raise money from investors who are going to be passive. I help them with staying compliant. So I make sure that they're in compliance with the laws so they don't get in trouble with either the state regulators or the SEC, and make sure that they're providing the level of service they should be to their...
Tilden, a lot of people invest in real estate. You know, sometimes people have their own house and they move away, they rent it out, or sometimes people get into an Airbnb. I guess maybe the next step after that is some people get together with a few friends, start an LLC, and then the LLC owns a property or two. From a legal perspective, what is a syndication?
So a syndication by definition is a group of people coming together for a common purpose. The way we really use it when we're talking about it, though, is we're talking about one person who's kind of running the show, or one group of people who's running the show, and they're bringing in passive money in order to make those investments. So the syndication really is that. And it can be in real estate, but it really doesn't, it's not specific necessarily to real estate. So it could be in a business, or it could be in some other thing. And that's all still syndication. Most of it, though, is real estate. Probably about 80% of my business are real estate developers and professionals.
And when you mention passive money, what is the legal definition of passive money?
There's no like hard and fast definition of the passive component, but really it's looked at what the totality of the circumstances are. So if you've got somebody who's putting together a deal and they're saying, "Hey, come, let's give me your money and we're going to raise this. And let's go into an LLC together, but I'm going to really kind of be running the show and making profits on it." Well, say you're active in order to not have to do the compliance with the security rules, that's still going to be a security. So it really is does it look like a duck? Does it smell like a duck type test? If it really looks passive, like all the decisions are being made by other people about anything dealing with the property. So, how to do leasing or how to do any of the property or asset management components, it's probably going to be that investor is passive. Or especially if somebody's getting paid more, getting some sort of bonus or some sort of fee to run the show, that's when it really is.
So tell us about your first syndication and how you got into this space.
So I was a real estate attorney. I focused on litigation. I litigated cases that had some sort of component to real estate to it, more on the side of valuation. So I didn't do landlord tenant or anything like that. It was mostly like people are fighting about ownership of property or the rights they're in. And so that meant a lot of things like bankruptcy, divorce, partnership disputes. Those were sort of my bread and butter. That is a very unhappy world. So by 10 years, I was pretty burnt out. And I started looking at the real estate agents, saw that they were making a lot of money. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to just do some of that while I'm still litigating. I was successful. I earned a CCIM's credential and was doing good at that, and still playing both sides. And then I had a partner of mine on the brokerage side came to me with a deal, and they said, "Hey, look at this deal. It's really great." I looked at it, and it really was great. So it was definitely under market. And it's like, "Yeah, this is really cool." And he's like, "We should syndicate this." And I said, "Okay." sounds good. So I didn't have any idea what it was, but I mean, I'd heard the phrase, but I didn't know certainly how to do it. So worked on it, worked on it. Spent a lot of time kind of figuring it out. Um, had that deal finally launched, and it was successful. Did another deal, and then it became evidence that, well, I'm really good at this side of the legal side of it too. I learned all the nuts and bolts, not just from like reading what the law was, but also from doing it and applying it and talking to investors. And so at that point it was like, well, why am I litigating? I don't like that anymore. Let me go and help syndicators do their own spots, do their own deals.
So let's say somebody's been investing in real estate for a while and they come across a really good deal. They come across an apartment building and they're like, man, like I could really upgrade these apartment units, increase the rent. There's like a really good money to be made here, but I don't have enough money myself to do it. I want to get money from, friends or colleagues or acquaintances or the guy I know at the country club. Take us through at a high level. What does it take to get a syndication like this together, make sure nobody gets in trouble with the IRS or the SEC and everything's above board?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it basically is if you're bringing in that investor money, then it's probably going to be a security. So at that point, you have kind of two choices. One you're not going to take. So the one choice you're not going to take is registering, that's in quotes, with the SEC, and that is a very formal process. You can think of that as going public because that's really what it is. So extremely expensive, takes forever. Nobody here is going to do that. So the other avenue is an exemption to registration. So there's several different exemptions. The one I specialize in is Regulation D, which allows you to raise an unlimited amount of money from an unlimited amount of accredited investors. So really, for that person who's identified the building, their goal becomes, okay, well, how do I bring those investors in, and then how do I make the deal go forward? And so bringing the investors in has, multiple components. We have to deal with the compliance piece of it. But we also have to focus on making sure it's a good enough deal after you get paid that your investors would want to come in, right? Because you theoretically the sponsor could say, well, I'm going to keep all the money and investors don't get any, but they'll never find a single investor. Or they could give away the farm and say, well, the investors get everything, but then they put in all this work for nothing. So there's a nice middle ground. So a lot of our work is the compliance piece, but also making sure that that the sponsor at the end of the day is compensated in a way that they make money, they feel good about what they're doing, their investors are making money, and everything.
In your experience, what is a good split? I mean, I know that a lot of people say 10% to 15% is what most investors are looking for before they get interested in syndication, right? Because you can probably get 8% anywhere, including the stock market. So let's say most investors are like, I want somewhere around 15% before I can even start thinking about joining a syndication. On the back end, the person running the syndication has to put in a lot of work. And like you just mentioned, they probably want to get compensated as well. What are some of the good compensation models that you've seen work in practice?
I mean, a lot of people do the preferred return with some sort of split between there. I don't actually start there. Like for my own deals, I don't do that. The way I start is I say, okay, my investors need X. And I know that number just based on experience, right? So if I've got a pretty decent building that's pretty stable, they might need a 15% IRR. If it's super safe, super no risk, maybe I can get closer to a 10% IRR. If it's more risky, I need probably in the twos, right? I need a 20 or above IRR. So I kind of narrow it down and say, okay, my target is, let's say it's 15. Then I work out the math, right? I say, okay, here's the scenario where I just pay all cash myself. Here's the scenario where I take loans. Here's the scenario where I take loans and I'm getting also money from investors. How can I, as a sponsor, make as much money as I can, but also make sure that they get their 15%? Because if it's not meeting that requirement, it's probably not going to work. And so out of that, sometimes it works out to be a preferred return and a split. Sometimes it works out to be money off the top. it's kind of always kind of working the math just to get to that point where it's great. I love when clients do it that way, because then it's like, okay, we've got realistic numbers here, and it makes it at a good level where they can talk to investors and say, look, you're going to get this 15% return. This is why we designed everything this way. So that's the way I like doing it. In terms of what they actually need, they probably need a 10. And they probably, or somewhere between 10 and 20, 25, depending on the risk. But I do have some sponsors who are doing it for less. And, based on that trust, they've got a lot of trust with their investors. Maybe they can pay less than 10. Maybe they can pay 8. Maybe they can even pay 6. It really depends entirely on, it's a scale of risk and trust at the same time.
And how long does it take to put everything together? So let's say a person finds one of these deals. Oh, this is a really good, we talked about the apartment building as an example. How long does it typically take to get all the agreements in place and the legal structure set up? And how long does it take before you can execute on the deal?
My turnaround time is generally 2 weeks, and so I think I'm the fastest. I may not be, but I think so. The rest of it is, and that's between the hiring and the point where they can raise money without legal problems. If it's possible to shrink that down to maybe a week at the absolute fastest, and then on top of that is the money raise time. That part can go fairly quickly if they've got all the investors lined up and there's commitments. That can take really just a couple days. I've got one sponsor who can raise literally, I don't know, he can put a deal out there for, I think the last one was like 500 million, like huge number, big number. And he can raise that like literally in 2 days. And yeah, he's fast. Most people are not that fast. But it ranges, but it really is based on the amount of work. For my side, it's generally 1 to 2. 1 week at the absolute fastest. 2 weeks is more reasonable.
Amazing. And in terms of the legal structures, et cetera, are there any states that are more investor friendly than others? And which states do you prefer to work in?
It doesn't, I don't have any preference in terms of states, in as far it goes for that. And there definitely are rules as it relates to taxes where we'll steer where we file, where we'll form the company, maybe, depending on the deal structure and all that. The issue also is kind of, there are a few states that have a little bit more zealous, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, state regulators, which I prefer to file not in some of those states, but there's just a few of those. So mostly it becomes whatever makes the most sense. And we can do that because our regulations, Regulation D, the main 2 rules that we use are preempt the state rules. So the state rules really can only ask for notification. There's just a few states that forgets that we preempt them. So, and not very often. It has to be pretty strong for them to forget that. So.
And now for maybe the trickiest question is, in your experience, how do syndicators find investors? Because I mean, it's one thing to find the deal, it's one thing to put together legal paperwork, but what is the best way to find people who have money to invest?
Well, there's 2 kind of pools. So if you are doing what we call a Rule 506B raise, it's just kind of everybody that you already know. And that's the pool that you're going to raise money from, regardless of whether you're doing a 506B or a 506C, right? Even if you're advertising, you're still going to go to everybody you know. So your own network is definitely the best place to start. And the syndicator's number 1 job is always building and growing that network. So more and more and more, bigger the network, the more they trust me anyway. And then the easier it's going to be able to raise money from them. If we're advertising, that's kind of another thing that we have to do, is we have to get that level of trust from absolutely cold up to enough that somebody's willing to say, here's $100,000. So that's more of a challenge to do, but it's certainly doable this day and age. There certainly are a lot of investors who will invest with it. We just need to prove to them that we're worthy of their trust. So that can be either, formal advertising, and that drives to a phone call and several meetings in order to talk to them about what you're working on. Or it could be something like, let's build and grow our network and then still bring people in. So if you were doing a webinars or something like that, that can grow that network rather than just being like, buy now, here's what I'm.
And if you don't mind me asking, for your very first syndication, how did you get the money together?
It was 506B raise, so it was all people within mine and my partner's network, and it was just a lot of talking. My first person that I talked to, I thought for sure was going to say yes, because I had seen him do a number of real estate deals and I thought it was good. And he said no. So I learned a lot from him saying no, because he explained I didn't really see it as like levels of risk tolerance or anything like that. I just sort of thought, good deal. Somebody's going to want to buy it. So it definitely was an educational experience. Having the first no and the second person said yes, because then by that point I knew, okay, this is what these kinds of people are looking for, and here's how I can talk about it a little bit.
You've obviously worked with a lot of different syndicators. What are some of the things that set a successful syndicator apart from the not successful ones?
Work. So the successful ones, they work. They do what needs to be done to get the investors in. They're willing to make deals. They're willing to, do whatever it takes to do that. They're also willing to focus on the long-term game rather than the short-term game. I may be able to get an investor today, but if I burn that bridge for future deals, it's not worth it. I'd much rather have them say no to this deal and then have them say yes to 10 deals after that. So that sort of sightedness, and probably what I think is like the most important thing, especially today, is focus on the story of what you're selling. So it's not about syndication. It can't be about, well, you're going to get a 15% IRR and we're doing a preferred return of 8%. I mean, come on, that's super boring. Nobody's going to do that because this guy over here is doing 16% IRR and a 9% preferred return. The only way to compete, even when you're advertising or anything, is on building that level of trust, building that faith in what you're doing and what you're working on. And that can only come by focusing on the story and the emotional reasons on investing in you and the product.
When someone gets into this space, usually as an investor, right? Now that I've been doing this podcast for a while, I've met a lot of different syndicators. My inbox is always full of some email that says, hey, look, we got this new deal going on here. Do you want to invest? Blah, blah, blah. Here's minimum investment, etc. If somebody hasn't worked with a syndicator before, I'm talking as an investor, what are some of the red flags? What are some of the things to look out for?
Probably, probably in no particular order, because I'll probably think of something. But probably the sloppy documents is like, I see it all the time, and it's, if it's obvious they bought a template, they don't care enough about their syndication to really make it worthwhile. If they're not willing to put in the work to show you that they know what they're doing and that they show up like a professional, they're not worth it. Number two probably is there's too much pressure. So I worked with one kind of famous guru guy, and their strategy was send them the PPM and then get them on the phone and tell them that it's sold out. It's gonna, got 4 hours left. You can get in right now. That's it. You don't have time. You don't have time to read the documents. Just sign now. Sign now. Run like the hill. Run for the hills. That you don't want that. So pressure on this. Syndication moves kind of fast, but it does not move so fast that thinking about things for a week is going to kill it. If it does feel like that, it's not a good deal. Uh, and then just trusting your gut. I mean, if you've got a bad read on somebody, it's not a good deal, no matter what it's being what is being said. I mean, I use that just for my practice and on deciding whether or not to take a client. If my gut says this feels wrong, yeah, I don't take them. And you should, your investors should definitely do the same thing. Just trust your gut. If it does feels wrong, there's plenty of other syndicators that have good deals.
Tilden, I've heard you speak about this idea called the founder investment theory. Can you give us a quick rundown of what that entails?
Yeah, founder investment theory really comes out of that first meeting with me pitching the investor, potential investor who didn't invest, is kind of how it got born. And it relates directly to that selling of the story of the investment. So there's a lot of components with it, but the real meat of it is you're making sure that the theory that you've got about the property, I'm investing in ground up development in this kind of product in this kind of location because if you don't have the because answer, you're going to have a real hard time in explaining why an investor should come in at all. So it's that theory that kind of separates just the pure numbers into what's the emotional reason to buy this is what is that, and making sure that when you get past that emotional level that it resonates on the rational level of reasons to buy too. Are we meeting the risk tolerance of the person, right? So is this somebody who really needs something super steady, or is it somebody who wants to take a big risk? Because neither of them is going to invest in the other kind of deal. Or is this a cash flowing deal, or is it a pure appreciation play? Because either of them, those kind of players, person who's cash flow is not going to ever invest in an appreciation play, and vice versa. They just don't want anything to do with it. It's not the right thing. And you don't need to waste time with it. And it's not that those investors are a waste of time. It's just that there's no match. So it's making sure that you're talking the right language to the right people, in order to make it easier to talk about what it is that you're selling. Find better investors.
Tilden, tell us a little bit more about your practice. Where can people find you, etc.?
Yeah, so we specialize in Regulation D offerings. We certainly do a ton of real estate. We prepare the private placement memorandum, operating agreement, subscription agreement, questionnaire, filing the Form D, notifying the states where they come from, all those legal compliance things. Where I think really kind of sets us different is that I've got this this boots on the ground experience, that I've been in their shoes. And so we do flat fee, but I don't do anything hourly. So if my clients want to talk to me about, hey, well, we're having trouble finding more investors. Can we talk about that? Sure, of course we can talk about that. And so we kind of open the doors to kind of exchange ideas and kind of come up with what's the best strategy for each individual syndicate. Best way to find us probably is either on YouTube. We've got a channel with a lot of videos, and then or online at moschettilaw.com.
And what is your YouTube channel's handle?
It's syndication @syndication attorneys, I think. But if you type in Moschetti syndication law, you'll see it.
Sounds good. I'll look it up. I'll put it in the show notes as well as your URL to your website. Tilden Moschetti, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Money Seed Podcast. Please remember to click like and subscribe. It really helps spread the message to other investors, and it helps attract new viewers to the show. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much.